Hey, thanks for checking out my channel. I'm Tom Neiman, and today we're going to be covering Ralph Albert Blakelock, specifically his painting called Hawley, Pennsylvania. There's Ralph right there. And coming up in just a few seconds, I'm going to show you my thumbnail sketch portrait in ballpoint pen, which you can check out on my iconic Legendary Creatives playlist here on the channel. Today we're using the palette you see up on screen: transparent red oxide, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, sap green, plant green, Van Dyke brown, cadmium yellow, Naples yellow, cadmium red, cadmium orange, quinacridone magenta, and titanium white. This is a leftover palette from a plein air painting that I did just a few days ago. I'm going to put the painting in the upper right hand corner as we go, and I'm going to be painting in my sketchbook on about 120 grade paper, pressed cotton, that has a layer of black gesso on top of it. Not sure why I chose black gesso today as opposed to white gesso or some other color. It's just what I went with. And that really kind of leads to my initial comment about what this is all about. This is playtime. I'm not able to get out into the field. We have a lot going on, both at work and in the home. And I want to use my time productively today. So we're going to do a master copy. And you can check out several of the master copies that I've done, quite a few actually, in my Study the Greats playlist on my channel here, where I cover other artists beyond Blakelock who I've covered before, including Monet, Van Gogh, just to name a few, George Inness, and several others. So I'm holding up my palette. You can see it's a muddy mess. I think I may have done 2 small sketches out in the field with this palette. And I have a lot of paint. I just don't want it to go to waste. So that's another reason for doing this too. And I'm going to play and have some fun. Really, my goal here is to experiment and explore ways with which Blakelock may have achieved some of the effects that he created in this painting. This painting of Hawley, Pennsylvania is said to have come shortly after a short respite in the area where he stayed with one of his wealthy patrons who put him up in his estate after he had a nervous breakdown. More on that in a few moments, but let's get into the painting here. We've mixed up a little bit of sap green, plant green, titanium blue, and white, and there is even a touch of cadmium yellow and Naples yellow in there too. It's kind of a muddy mess. I'm laying in the initial shapes which will compose the design of this painting, and that's also part of this process. One of the benefits of doing master copies, you get to explore the design elements and the impact that they have on paintings and your perception of them, not only as a viewer but also as a painter. There's a lot of value in that. In addition to studying those items, studying the application of color, the shapes themselves within the bigger shapes, that's all part of the process here, and it definitely influences, as a painter, our own aesthetic sense when we go to create our own original work. So this is a fun process. I really enjoy doing it. It's a great way to fill the gaps in time when you can't focus on the things that you normally would be drawn to as an artist because of a time crunch. Now, a little bit about Ralph Blakelock. He was born in New York City in 1847, and he had an interesting family life. I've gone into that in other Study the Greats episodes where I've covered Blakelock, so I'm not going to go into that. But I will just mention, and I've mentioned this before, that he achieved early success as an artist. He was apparently a prodigious, very talented young artist that saw critical acclaim and commercial success relatively early. Now, mind you, he was painting at a time where he was surrounded by American landscape painting giants, folks with the name like Church and Inness and Bierstadt and others were around him and traveling in the same circles, showing their work alongside of Blakelock. So he had some pretty good competition, but also pretty good mentorship at his disposal amongst the New York-based painters that were painting at that time. Now, he is somebody who ultimately became a heroic and significantly tragic figure. So there is some discussion in his biographical information that suggests that he may have suffered from bipolar depression and ultimately schizophrenic delusions. We won't know for sure, I don't think, but he did spend some time being institutionalized closer to the turn of the century. And for the last 20 years or so of his life, he was institutionalized, was not able to paint, and quite often was mocked by the folks that were taking care of him, suggesting that his expression of his artistic talents were just part of his delusional visions. And very, very tragic. His family of 9 children were left living in squalor. They had significant financial hardship, and it's just a terrible, terrible story. Now, if you look back earlier on in his career, like many of the greats from that time, he spent a lot of time on the road. He did what seems to be an annual trek across the country into the West and painted feverishly. He spent some time painting Native Americans, and he would do so on solo trips. So quite a remarkable, heroic, brave soul, I would say. But unfortunately, obviously, things took a turn for the worse. So the interesting thing about this scene of Hawley, Pennsylvania, he had a wealthy patron who bought some of his works and also helped promote his work. And they had, I guess, some sort of a compound or family farm in the Hawley, Pennsylvania area, which is here in the Poconos where I reside with my family and where I spent most of my time painting. And Hawley, Pennsylvania is really nice city, small town that's located up near the Lake Wallenpaupack area. It's the largest freshwater lake here in Pennsylvania, and it's just a beautiful area. So apparently, after one of his episodes that resulted in him being institutionalized, when he got out, they offered to put him and his family, which included 9 children, up for a little bit of a vacation, long vacation or a respite. And it said in some of the things that I've read online that this scene that he painted may have at least been, at least to some degree, based upon some of the scenery in the Hawley area, hence the name Hawley, Pennsylvania. Now, it took some time, but I was able to find that he's done some other paintings based upon the Pocono region. And this is something that was hard to come by. Apparently, he has at least 3 or 4 paintings. Hawley Valley, which is a panoramic view of the town of Hawley, Paupack Falls, and then this one here, Hawley, Pennsylvania. So there's some other works apparently, and I'm going to continue to scour the internet. And when I get opportunities to visit museums live, I'll look and ask the more well-educated curators there questions related to his background as well, if the opportunity provides itself. So you can see I have most of the major shapes in at this point. I'm mixing my paint on my palette, which is a bit of a mess. And I know that's not, from a presentation standpoint, the best approach, but I'm a working artist and I need to use my resources as effectively and as efficiently as I can. One of my biggest and most important resources is time, but paint also is an important resource as well. So I'm reusing that palette, as I mentioned earlier, from a plein air painting session from a couple days ago. So I'm going to lay in some of the shapes within the shapes, and that includes the little home structure. I'm laying it in using kind of a light grayish purple at this point. I am painting wet on wet, so I'm going to finish this in one sitting within roughly 40 minutes. Blakelock, based upon what I could tell, based upon the notes that I've seen related to his painting process, was typically working in a larger format. He was considered to be part of the tonalist movement. Interestingly enough, one parallel, although they didn't have a relationship as far as I can understand based upon what I've read, one parallel between Blakelock and one of the more famous painters from his era, George Inness, is that not only did they have early success, and they both started out in the Hudson River School movement. So if you look at earlier works of both of these painters, Blakelock and George Inness, their paintings were much more finished, much more realistic looking, and also focused on the grandeur of the scenery that they were painting, whether it be on the East Coast or out west. And they both kind of evolved over time, probably for various reasons, into tonalist painters. And those two movements, the Hudson River School and the tonalist movement, those are, from my perspective, when it comes to looking at American art history, those are probably amongst the two most significant art movements in the American or U.S. art history. And the tonalist kind of paintings will feature work that's been done typically over multiple settings. There's scrumbles, there's glazes, all kinds of techniques that are intended to evoke different feelings. And there's a much less of an effort, much less of a focus on detailed rendering, much less on the illustration side of the spectrum, more on the side of the spectrum where most of the information is suggested very loosely and elegantly at the same time. So I would say this painting kind of falls right on the kind of outer edge of the spectrum of a tonalist style painting. Many, if not most, classically categorized tonalist paintings will not include any evidence of human life. There might be a shadowy figure standing on a riverbank. That might be it. This painting, there's quite a few little features. If you look at the actual original, there's the farmhouse, there's a barn or a shed. There may be some equipment up in the field on the side of the hill, a fence, and some other things. So this certainly, I would argue, could be categorized as a tonalist style painting, but I'm no expert. I'm just a self-taught artist and trying to learn as I go here. All right, so we're going to start putting in some of the midtones. Mind you, I'm working in a smaller format, wet on wet as mentioned earlier, so I am not going to go through the painstaking process of adding the significant details that Blakelock originally incorporated into this painting. He was, I think, most notably remembered for the tonalist work that he did on the nocturne side of things, a lot of moonlit landscapes where he was able to capture very eerie vibrations, very luminescent kind of skies showing effectively the moon dancing across the clouds or across a low-lying haze and reflecting off of various objects within the dark landscape. He was a master at this, and if you look at his paintings, including some of the ones that I've covered here on my channel in the Study the Greats series that you could search for on my playlist, actually Study the Greats, you'll see at least one, I think two moonscapes of Blakelock's that I've covered. And it, just like in this case, it was the case in those instances, my goal is not to recreate the masterpiece of artwork exactly. First of all, I would probably need several more decades to even have a chance of doing that. It's really all about playing, exploring, discovering, and hopefully applying some of the things that I learned into my original artwork down the road. And I can already see, one of the things that this particular painting has opened me up to is experimenting with different color mixtures, experimenting with different effects, like for example those clouds wrapping around the side of the mountain ridge and over the top of the mountain ridge. That's an effect that I've always marveled at in nature, but never have had the wherewithal or the opportunity to actually try and render that or suggest that in the painting. I'm going to get to do it here today because it's a prominent feature within his painting where you see some of the mountainside, some of the mountaintop kind of dissolve as it gets enveloped in that cloud. There's some other things too. For example, there's some ways with which he suggests vegetation, which are different from how I normally would approach it. And obviously the design too. It's just a masterful design. He does a great job of leading you into the painting and around the painting, and doing so in ways that are mostly subtle, but also quite direct as well, including the angle of the fence, the angle of the incline of the mountain, the patterns within and amongst the trees and brush and the shoreline, which for all we know may have no resemblance to what he actually saw in the scene that inspired this painting. He quite likely arranged things knowing that he had to contend with the little rectangle that he was painting the scene within in order to make it interesting. Now we've come to the part where I get to play a little bit with the clouds and their impact on the top of this mountain and the side part of the ridge here. Just go ahead and break some of those lines that I worked so hard to render. This takes a little bravery, as Bob Ross would say. Here's your bravery test. So, I did take some great care to make sure that I did my best to render that ridge, that mountain, and proportionately kind of render it so it made sense and aligned with the original. And now I'm going to go ahead and just destroy it at least a little bit. I brought some of that mixture of titanium white and cadmium yellow, along with varying degrees of cadmium red, And I just went ahead and ripped through that line right where the cloud is kind of piercing over the edge, completely dissolving that line that was used to create that mountain shape. From here on out, I'll use a little bit more care, and we'll put some indications of that lighter grayish color, in some cases mostly white, pigment over the side of the mountain, because clouds themselves, they really have no shape, and it's also ever changing. So they're amorphous. If a cloud comes over a ridge, it may retreat at any moment. It might shift. You might see more of that cloud shape spill over in other parts of that ridge. So we're not taking too much care, just trying to create some interesting shapes. Now we're putting some sky holes through some of those trees on the left-hand side, and we'll rebuild those a little bit, as you'll see in a moment, just to honor the shape that is actually in the original Blakelock painting. Now, while I have that lighter pigment on my brush, I'm going to circle around to the couple of spots within the painting where there are some lighter shades and work that in. We want to make sure that we do that. That does a couple of things. One, it helps ensure that we don't waste any paint. Two, it can help bring some color harmony to a painting just by having the same color, the same hue, or a closely related hue in various parts of the painting, and you do see that in the original. I'm going to try and replicate that to a lesser degree with my little master copy here. I'm going to work my way up through. I switched brushes, and I have some darker color, which is, I know it's off camera there, but I'm taking from my palette mostly Van Dyke Brown and a little bit of sap green and ultramarine blue to make up this dark color, where the tree is actually in its own shadow for the most part. And we're going to build that shape up a little bit more here. It'll take a little bit of effort because there's quite a bit of wet white paint that makes up the sky there. And as we kind of wrap up using the available pigment on the brush, I'll try and get the rest off by incorporating that into the mountainside there as well. Once again, when you have color on the brush and you work it in at various points circulating around the painting, it helps create color harmony. It also promotes efficient use of paint, which is pretty expensive. Since I'm working wet on wet, or alla prima in one sitting, I don't have the advantage of being able to use scrumbling and glazing. I also have the disadvantage of potentially maxing out the capacity of my surface to accept new paint in this one setting. So I'm going to go ahead and use a little trick that I learned myself. I'm sure I'm not the first to do this. But I'm going to go ahead and take some paper towel, and with great care, I'm just going to lay it down on the surface of my oil painting, which is starting to look pretty good, and just soak up, just pat very gently, being careful not to shift the paper towel. Just pat it gently and lift off some of the excess paint. It'll also flatten out some of the globs that are inevitably on there. Also make sure every time I pick it up and put it down, I either fold it or use a new paper towel to incorporate a clean sheet of paper. We don't want smudging to occur. You do see in the sky there, I lifted up enough paint in some of the blue section and then the white and gray sections where the clouds are, where you could actually see the black gesso, which is dried black gesso that I laid down on the paper originally, essentially the surface I'm painting on. those are not smudges. That's actually the gesso showing through. And I might just leave it that way, who knows. But in any event, what I found this process will do, especially when painting wet on wet, it'll allow us to have a better chance of getting some of the effects we want to achieve in the end. It kind of helps us avoid the kind of the scenario we see when we're plein air painting alla prima, when we have large globs of paint on the surface, when we have a hard time actually applying additional paint. It helps us avoid that challenge. It also, I find, will help the painting dry a little bit more quickly as well, which is nice because, if you're like me, storage is always a challenge. I paint almost every day, and I have quite a few paintings that I have in storage, some of which I would never, ever put up for sale, some of which just haven't sold or I haven't had the opportunity to show yet. So now I'm going to start working my way through. I'm going to lighten up some of the areas that need to be lightened up and reshape some of the dark areas. I'll add some illusions of detail, like in a few moments after I'm done with this roof line and enhancing that and adding a little garage or shed feature. I'll also add in some windows and doors, and we'll try and capture the reflection in the water there. And we'll try and lighten up some of the areas in the land and reshape some of those trees on the left-hand side of the painting as well, and then we'll be done. So hopefully you're enjoying this. If you are, if you're getting anything out of this, whether it's some of the historical elements associated with the biographical information for Ralph Blakelock, or if it's just following along with this process of creating a master copy of Blakelock's painting called Hawley, Pennsylvania, please give me a like. Please subscribe. Please share this video with somebody who you think might find it enjoyable or helpful. I'm going to finish up here with a little bit more biographical information, some of which may have been shared in some of the previous covers that I've done of Blakelock's paintings on my Study the Greats series playlist. In 1877, Blakelock married Cora Rebecca Bailey, and they had 9 children. So largely by most folks in the industry, Blakelock was considered to be a true genius artistically. However, for one reason or another, he really was challenged by the business side of painting. And I think anybody who's actually tried to generate a living, generate income in this industry could definitely empathize with that. It's not an easy thing to do. Most of us creatives are pretty sensitive people, and in addition to that, we try to focus on what's important to us, and that's the process of creating our art and nurturing our souls in a way that will help create fertile ground for creativity to flourish. And for a lot of us, the idea of engaging in marketing or sales or crunching numbers to try and figure out an appropriate cost estimate for a commission, these are things that will make a lot of creative people cringe and perhaps make them almost feel sick to their stomach if they have to do it more often than not. So I could imagine how it would be very easy for somebody like Blakelock to have challenges with the business side of art. Now, it's interesting. So along those lines, Blakelock had offered anecdotally a painting to a collector for $1,000. And the collector, for example, in this anecdote, made a counter offer after refusing the proposed sum. And Blakelock reportedly found himself in a bitter argument with his wife as a result of that. There was a domestic dispute, and Blakelock returned to the patron and sold the painting for a much lesser sum, I think just a few $100. And at the time, it was probably a decent amount of money. Mind you, if you remember, he lived in the 1800s, ultimately most of his life, and passed away, I believe, in 1919 after a long stint in institutionalized care for his mental health issues. But this was really a challenge for him. So, after the domestic dispute, Blakelock returned to the patron and sold that painting, as I mentioned. He was defeated and frustrated. It said that he broke down and tore the cash into pieces. So you talk about escalating an argument. I imagine his wife was not real happy with that. So it was after repeated failed business transactions that he began to suffer some extreme depression and eventually show signs of mental frailty. So that's just a sad, sad story. This is a person who went out on his own in the 1800s, traveled through the West, actually lived with Native Americans, painted them, drew them, created relationships with them, handled the harshness of nature while traveling during that time on his own. So brave and courageous and capable, and yet fell to pieces when he was trying to provide for his family. It's a very, very sad story. So in any event, we are coming on just a little bit after 30 minutes of painting here, and we'll wrap up in no more than another 9 minutes or so. And the paintings come together. You know, this is one of those issues where my production capabilities and the limitations on them are negatively impacting your experience to some degree. I apologize for that. The painting I see has a pretty significant glare due to some overhead lighting. So you could see some ripples like in the upper right hand corner in the painting where it's lifted up a little bit, and that little plane, that curve in the plane is resulting in there being some glare coming across. So it's distorting your view a little bit, but I think you get a sense for where we're at right now. We have all the major shapes in. We have the reflections in the water, some of the shapes within the shapes, some of the midtones, and so even some of the highlights are in. The interesting effect of the cloud mass kind of coming over the mountaintop and diffusing the edge of the mountaintop and the side ridge. So we're just going to make our way through and add some additional details here and try and enhance those areas that need a little bit more enhancing. For example, now we're going to go ahead and put in a front door. Had a little debate internally as to whether or not I should use a palette knife or my brush here. I'm using for this, I believe, it might be a number 1 round, and I'm going to go ahead and use the same brush to add the windows, forcing myself not to try and be too precise and recreate his window arrangement exactly. I'm going to be off by a window or two. But once again, my format that I'm painting on is 11 by 14. He was much, much larger with his painting, and I'm just looking to do this just to learn, explore, have some fun here. So we have the windows and the door in. We're going to put some other elements in. For example, there's a little overhang over that door. We're going to enhance the shape that's making up kind of the side view of the house there. Try not to mess the perspective up too much. And we're going to make our way around using the paint that we have on the brush to enhance some of the landscape effects. We have a nice dark paint on there, which is mostly Van Dyke brown and ultramarine blue with a little bit of sap green. And we're going to bring that around and enhance some of those dark areas. For example, a little overhang on the shoreline. We'll work that into the water to create some indication of some ripples in the water and diffuse some of those highlights. That's actually one of the really nice elements of the original painting. If you check out that water very closely, you can really get the sense of a very serene body of water, very calm, tranquil body of water, just based upon the patterns that Blakelock incorporated into the surface of the water. I'm not going to try and render that perfectly either. I'm just going to hint at it, suggest at it, and we're going to continue to make our way along here. Once again, I want to say thank you for checking out my work. Thanks for checking out my channel. If you found this helpful, if you enjoyed this, got any enjoyment out of this at all, please like and subscribe and share. 3 things you could really do to support me and my channel, to help ensure that my channel continues to grow its distribution And quite frankly, I do occasionally get clients as a result of this free content that I share, commission requests, folks that reach out and want to purchase different paintings that I showcase here and on my website at thomasmichaelneiman.com. So by sharing, liking, and subscribing, you're really helping me out, and I appreciate that so very much. So we're going to wrap this up. Once again, thanks again for checking out my work. I hope you have a wonderful day. And over the course of the next 4 or 5 minutes or so, just enjoy the painting and hang on to the end. I'll include a link to my website URL where you can check out additional paintings, some of my writing, and some other things that I offer up to those that are interested in my work. Thanks again. Be